This source contains two sources, one of them being about a Mexican immigrant named Julio, and the other being about an immigrant from Cameroon named Sambo. The idea that these stories try to emphasize is the idea of a harsh reality. Julio traveled through a desert for weeks without food or water in order to get back into America. Julio's story circles around this fact for its entirety. At the very end, it mentions that Julio thinks about the dead body he found. The reason why he thinks about it is because that dead person was most likely in the same situation as Julio. This person died in complete isolation, too. All of this shows that a lot of people have unfair beginnings, and sometimes even more unfair endings. Sambo's story is about him being sent to a detention center for illegal immigration. He says they call it detention in the U.S., but it is a jail. This prison was mixed with people who violated immigration laws and murderers and actual criminals. Later in this passage, Sambo talks about the immigration objectors in the U.S. He says that the hardest working person should be given the job over anyone else. This brings up the idea of fairness, and that a lot of times in life, there is a large absence of fairness. This source confirms that the American dream is more difficult to achieve for some people. It is unfair to make generalizations about immigrants or any large group of people because they all have different stories. Again, it is important to pay attention to voice because then it is possible to make the realization that generalizations are not good because they never apply to everyone in a specific group of people.
This is the story of Abel, an immigrant from Guatemala who has fled multiple times to the United States to escape civil war. When Abel was only 12, he traveled to Mexico in hopes of finding work picking coffee beans. He spoke neither English nor Spanish and was robbed of his possessions. From there, he traveled 8 days through the desert to reach Arizona. In America, Abel was homeless and earned $3 an hour cutting lawns. At the age of 18, he took a bus to New Bedford on the East Coast, where he worked the majority of his life making sub-minimum wage in dangerous factories. Abel said that he did it because the money was worth my suffering. Once Abel watched one of his friends die while cleaning the inside of a machine which was 180 degrees. He couldn't report the situation to OSHA because his boss would make his life miserable. Stories like Abel's make the American dream look awful. As Abel himself notes, his entire life has been work, but he feels American and is treated like a slave. According to Abel, the only crime he and other immigrants have committed is coming to work and make money. It is important to hear stories such as this one in order to break down common stereotypes Americans hold regarding immigrants. People see them as lousy criminals who steal American jobs, but the fact is, no Americans were willing to work in the dangerous fish factories Abel did. Additionally, the Americans who employed Abel frequently ignored safety regulations, abused workers, and sold drugs. These employers, not the immigrants they employ, are the real criminals.
Pepe Lu. The impact that a new country has on a second-generation immigrant is so great that it can affect the language and culture. Although many immigrants do not immediately label themselves as American, the American influence on their children is clearly seen in this story. The pressure that immigrants live through in order to provide for their families in an environment which at times can be anti-immigrant is sometimes met with unaccepting society. The main point is that national origin plays a vital role in the development in one's character and could potentially lead to loyalty to that country in the form of language, culture, and living habits. As Pepe Lu quotes, "I would never leave for Canada or Taiwan or anywhere else. I am American, and that means I stay and fight." Her family's uncertainty with American acceptance left them in a dangerous situation in which immigration back to China was strongly considered. The story contributes to the definition of American identity. Paying attention to the differences in Pepe Lu and her parents, who are from Taiwan, shows the differences between Chinese immigrants and ABCs, or American-born Chinese. The acceptance of America as her country shows her compassion and dignity, but at the same time pays homage to China, which is also part of her personality and culture. These voices represent the immigrants' attitudes, no matter the race, but in this particular case, in ABC's American Lifestyle through Asian Influences.
Orlando Velez's poem, Transcendental Latino, captures the journey of an immigrant as the speaker explains their travels, highlighting on the tough trials they must face. By using phrases such as faraway land and weight of a nation, the speaker explains how difficult the journey can be. Furthermore, the source shows American intolerance towards immigrants by portraying Lady Liberty as being ready to exploit undocumented immigrants in a land called the United States of Assassins. This shows the speaker's viewpoint of the United States as being an unsympathetic country that kills. This source demonstrates a negative viewpoint of the American identity. The speaker uses descriptions of American actions such as threw boulders and put police tape to prevent your journey, thus condemning the American identity as exclusive, unkind, and apathetic. The significance of Velez's piece is that it brings forward points of optimism about immigrants reigning victorious against the oppressiveness of the United States, while also condemning the actions of those the speaker labels as citizens of the United States of Assassins. This source is a documentary of the life of Marisol Conde Hernandez as an undocumented immigrant. It shows how undocumented immigrants are often dehumanized in the public's eye. It also shows how the culture of said immigrants are often suppressed, and they are typically not allowed to openly celebrate them as to protect their identities. In the video, Marisol says, "You have no options," showing that while undocumented immigrants have the capability to live a normal and productive life, Marisol herself being enrolled as a law student, the fear and apathy that is expressed towards them often prevents them from doing so. Marisol's father explains that undocumented immigrants have to live in darkness. The simple task of getting pulled over could result in their deportation. These videos play a role in addressing how different the American dream is for varying people, and how Marisol and her family feel like they cannot live with an American identity even while being active members of society. These videos in particular address how Marisol's American dream would most likely be to save her family from deportation and keep those she loves out of poverty, and also addresses how isolated her family feels because of where they came from. While the American dream for many is to have a successful and productive life, it is even more apparent how difficult in a lot of cases unattainable that is for undocumented immigrants. The significance of this documentary is that it highlights the brutal truth of Marisol's life and allows people to see how difficult the life of an undocumented immigrant can be through a real-life perspective.
Ogachukwu Benite felt different from everyone else due to the name she was given by her grandmother. She constantly felt different from other kids as they were unable to pronounce her name. The other kids would squint their faces, expose their front teeth, tilt their heads, and with high voices and a hint of laughter, say, "What? And how do you say it again?" Other kids would make fun of her using African stereotypes, like asking if she lived in a hut and has lions in her backyard. Throughout all of this, her parents would constantly drill the notion into her head that she was Nigerian American, not African American. Her parents had set forth the expectation that she would become a doctor, a Catholic, and marry a Nigerian man. The weight of sustaining Nigerian culture was on her back. Although she looks the same and talks the same as other African Americans, no one could tell the difference. Despite all this, she believes that skin color, culture, race, and parent fulfillment should not define who she is. She defines who she is. Ogachukwu's story can contribute to the definition of the American dream because it shows how, despite what others say or do, you still dictate who you are and what you can be. It is important to listen to voices such as these so people can identify the differences of culture, race, color amongst other Americans.